Going and live. Hey everybody. Guess what? It's Friday. You know what that means? Welcome to my community manager, the community built by, for, and managed by community managers. Hello. It is Friday and we have a fantastic panel for you. Thanks a lot for joining in, guys. Big hello to everybody over on the Twitter side who's taken part in the tweet chat, CMGR Hangout. Big ups to Carrie and Kristen, who are holding it down on that side. We have an absolutely marvelous panel today. Really great topic that's going to be just sweet. So my name, by the way, is Dom. I am a community manager for BTC Revolutions, as well as a co-host here with Sherry and Brew. For the topic today, one of the favorite community-related talks this past year was Anna Noemi's talk entitled Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, How We Can Borrow from Other Traditions and Level Up Our Game. She gave that at CMX East in New York. And in her talk, Anna emphasized that there's no need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to building communities, and actually pointed out 5 ingredients of a growing community and looked at 5 ingredients of growing community, looking at Alcoholics Anonymous, looking at Burning Man, Linux, Stack Exchange as examples, and expanding even further on the concept how it's possible to reach behavior patterns to predict how a community will interact so that you can proactively set up your community workflows and policies accordingly. Now, if that sounds really awesome and you're like, man, how do you do that? Well, good thing we assembled a fantastic panel of people that are going to tell you how to do just that. So I'm actually going to kick it over to them for some intros, starting with the wonderful Sherry.
Hey everyone, I'm Sherry Rohde, and I'm the community manager at Magento, which is an open source e-commerce platform, as well as co-produce CMGR Hangout here with Brew and Dom.
And I'm Scott Moore. I'm an online community veteran of a long time and dilettante who does consulting. So we'll leave it at that. Randy?
Hi, I'm Randy Farmer, co-author of Building Web Reputation Systems, and I'm a social product development consultant.
Awesome. Hey, Jono, how's it going?
I can introduce myself if you want. Hey, everyone. First of all, thank you for having me on here. My name is Jono Bacon. I work as Director of Community at GitHub. And I wrote a book called The Art of Community and founded the Community Leadership Summit that happens every year, just before OSCOM.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Lopez. I'm the Senior Director of Community at Moz, and we make software for marketers. So we are always looking into what's going on in the marketing world and how things are going there. And our developers have let me been doing some fun stuff in GitHub. So yay, GitHub!
Woohoo!
They're scared, but they're letting me do it.
That sounds like a good way to work.
Woohoo, all around. Sweet. So let's jump in this. I'm really excited to see what you guys are going to teach all of us today. And we're going to talk about each other. So the first question, what are good resources for somebody who wants to start looking at behavior research? So starting from square one, where do you really go?
I have a couple of thoughts maybe to kick it off if I'm not stepping on anyone's toes. So I think there's some really interesting books that people can read about behavioral economics. I mean, the go-to book by miles is Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, which is a tremendous book in itself. And in that book, he basically talks about, that there's a core set of principles in how human beings tend to react in irrational ways and consistently irrational ways to various stimulus. And that I think that's a good intro, a good primer. But there's also a great book called Nudge, which is basically the principle of lots of small changes in the world will have a profound impact on a bigger goal. And I think where that resonates significantly with community leadership is that a community is in some ways the sum of its parts, but those parts are really important. And when we understand the behavioral skeleton behind how people operate, we can string together different elements of the experience to create more effective communities. So nudge and predictably irrational, I think, are good combos. And then a final one that I'd recommend, even though it's pretty dry, is a book called Obliquity, which is basically about the fact that the way in which we accomplish our larger goals is indirectly. So instead of, you want to go out there and build a car, you want to build a successful startup, you want to do whatever, if you just run straight towards that goal, invariably you won't actually achieve it as well as figuring out the different elements that you can influence to accomplish that goal indirectly. Like I say, it's a pretty hardcore, heavyweight book to get through, so drink a lot of coffee, but it's worth the read.
So
go ahead, Scott.
Oh, I was going to pick up on Jono's drink a lot of coffee. I'm going to go back a few steps. I think it's important that when we're doing research, so there's interpreters of research, and I think Jono, I also recommend what Nudge and Predictively Irrational. What I'd also recommend is learning how to understand research itself. There's a lot of research papers available. More and more of it's available, but it gets misinterpreted by by some folks. So there's science writers who are out there, and I'm pointing my fingers right at Huffington Post because I've recently seen a number of research articles where the headlines and the articles are just, they're wrong from the actual research. So I've tweeted out 3 URLs that should get folks started. They're how to read a research paper for non-scientists. It's useful, it's good, but it does require effort, persistence, and patience to get through these in order to really understand them and then start being able to apply them. So I'll stop and go. Let's hear Randy.
Yeah, I have stuff in between. Again, Predictably Irrational is the thing I recommend to everyone. If you don't understand the key principles in there, you shouldn't be designing any online community or product of any type. But in terms of mechanics and reading papers, I highly recommend a book by Robert Krause and Paul Resnick called, it looks like this, so if you see it on the shelf, Building Successful Online Communities, Evidence-Based Social Design. And what's awesome about this is it answers questions specifically through the form of design claims. So it says, commitment to an online community group increases willingness to contribute to it. This is the thing we think is true. And then it gives you the citations for all the research that applies that both proves and disproves this and shows that these things are all trade-offs. So one of the magic tricks is realizing that there is no one solution that fits all, and this is a book that really makes it clear. In fact, I never probably would have written my book if this book had been out when I wrote mine back in 2010. Another one, in terms of process, if you're trying to design a system specifically to get users to change their behavior, I recommend this book from O'Reilly, Designing for Behavior Change by Stefan Wendell. Now, this focused on his time originally at Fitbit, trying to figure out how to create software and systems that encourage people to get fit. Although that seems very specific and hardware associated, the processes in here are in fact very close to the processes I use when I consult with companies to do social design for software and community design. So both of these are like how-to books and question answering books.
I'll jump in for just a second. I don't have any additional books and things to add. I think these guys have covered all of those bases really well. One thing that I would say that we have particularly done is reading. When you said, where do you go? And I'm like, initially I'm like, the internet. Because a lot of people actually put out information about their own communities, about how they've done certain things, about how they've done this. I was just recently reading the blog post Atlassian's 5.5 billion user onboarding magic. And when you read it, it isn't actually magic, right? But it tells you what they do. And sometimes getting those insights as to how others work and whatnot can help you understand what to do or give you an idea of where to get going. To add a little to the books and good smarts.
I was just going to say as well, for those people who are watching this who are thinking, what is behavioral economics, and what are we actually talking about here? I think if somebody wants to watch a really, really good, solid kind of newbie introduction to this, there is a guy called Rory Sutherland, who may be the most English person on the internet. He's awesome, and he actually works for a big advertising agency, and he gives a tremendously entertaining TED talk called "Life Lessons from an Ad Man." And he's a wonderful speaker, and it's just a nice kind of introduction. Part of the reason why I'm recommending this is because when I first discovered behavioral economics from my best buddy, this is what he showed me, and I think it just gets your imagination going around how we can apply this in the community world. So definitely recommend checking that out. It's 18 minutes of your time well spent.
I want to do one final thought, and that is all of what we're talking about here in terms of behavior research is sociology and human behavior, and so finding a Sociology 101 book will not hurt anyone. Getting some of that grounding basics of group behavior, it applies online. We see a lot of the same behaviors. So in conjunction with all of this, just a grounding in some of the basic terminology and the basic fundamentals of things, group behaviors that can be identified, will not hurt anyone.
This is absolutely fantastic. Like, I know we're having like a little, our group is having like a little side chat for some of the back end CMGR stuff. And we're like, man, this topic is awesome, and I love it when I just have to stay quiet because the 4 other people are just like so wickedly smart and they're just dropping knowledge bombs. And if anybody needed to fill out their community manager wish list for Christmas, you just got a bunch of books that you can crank through. So that's really, really sweet. And I know, just if you guys are paying attention or if you're just watching, make sure you do follow the hashtag. If you have any questions, it's a great panel to get in so that these peeps can answer them. Also, all of these links to all these books and the TED Talks and all that stuff is all going out there. So make sure you're paying attention over there. So let's jump into the second question here. How can, when we're talking about like our existing communities, how can you identify behavior patterns within communities that already exist? What are some ways that you can start looking at those?
I think typically a lot of this tends to, well, there's a couple of thoughts here. One is, I think the temptation is that we look at data and we look at metrics, and this is always a topic that's a common subject of discussion with community leaders, is what do we measure and how do we measure it and how do we use that to influence decisions? And I think the wider complicated issue that we have with metrics and community leadership is that community management and just team leadership is effectively building intangible value. It's invariably value that is very difficult to measure cohesively. And one of the things that attracted me to this kind of world of behavioral economics is that it rucks up against this principle that the world can be defined by numbers and spreadsheets. So I think that it's important for us to look at data as a means for us to identify commonalities in what people are doing, but then we don't just limit ourselves to that data. What we also do is we look at observational, observational kind of elements and just the overall kind of experiences that we can define in communities. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that Dan Ariely talks about in one of his books is that where he talks about cheating, is that people only want to cheat a little bit. They just want to break the rules a tiny amount. They don't want to necessarily cheat significantly. And they did some independent testing where people basically put in a position where they could very blatantly cheat and get away with it. And when they asked those people, that was the control condition, when they asked those people to read the 10 Commandments before they were put in a similar position to cheat, the level of cheating went down. And so that gives us an interesting insight into what we do, but does that mean that we can then map that directly to, for example, reducing abuse in certain communities? And I think while that's a good indicator, what's important for us to do is to run prototypes and see how that actually would operate in a different setting. Because while that might apply well to a test in a lab at MIT, does that apply to Mars? Does that apply to GitHub? Does that apply elsewhere? And I think it's very difficult to tell. And that's, to me, is the biggest challenge with this whole science is you watch the videos, you read the books, and think, wow, that's really cool. It gives us a lot of things to think about. But how do we actually apply that? And I think we've got to be conscious about not just taking, just because it works in this condition, and applying it literally somewhere else. So I'd say like a mixture of looking at metrics to identify maybe commonalities, but then really just looking at what people do and how they operate in communities, which is much more of a kind of a gut feel kind of situation, I think.
You can also ask them.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, that's actually one thing I wanted to add is I agree it has to be a combination of both, and if you're just using metrics, you're missing out on a whole thing of like, you know, real people conversations, real understanding of what's happening. Having, you know, actually asking them, right, talking to somebody. What we've done here at Moz is, you know, we've completed this journey mapping of what we think a community member, a paying member, whatever goes through. We think this is what they do, and these are the ways that they feel at each individual stage and all this stuff. And then we've actually gone through. We have a research team, and you know, they've actually done tests with folks to make sure, like, our assumptions correct? The data that we have telling us that this is the way it's happening, is that really correct? And just sort of validating assumptions and making sure that we really know what the heck is going on and why they're doing things. And a spot where we think, oh, people must be really excited when they do this. It's like, no, they're actually pissed off when they go to the help hub and need to find something, right? And we think, oh, great, they're going to the help hub more often, so they're getting all their information without us having to tell them. And no, they're like, and now I'm mad at you because it's not easy to figure out what my next thing is to do, right? So having that combination of figuring out, okay, this is what we think is happening, and then trying to validate it with, you know, real conversations with real people, and watching how it actually works is somewhat magical.
I'd like to dispel the magic on some of that. The word for this, to tie this together, is ethnography. You'll do a little miniature ethnographic study of your group, and what that means is you're paying attention to how people are behaving within the group without necessarily interfering with it. And this is useful, especially if there's a pattern of behavior that's happening, or there's behavior that's happening and it hasn't yet formed a pattern, or it's new to you, your experience level. Observing it, trying to track it, what's happening over time, and then thinking, what are the outward patterns that we're seeing? We may not know the underlying reasons just yet. What are the outward patterns? And then as a community manager, you might think, well, what if everyone did this? Is this behavior I want to encourage? Is this behavior I want to discourage? And you can make some real decisions about that. But I've done both. So tying both of this together, seeing data pop and going, wow, there's this behavior that's just suddenly happening and I don't know why, and using some of the data to sift out like what's going on with who, but then going into the conversations of who's actually talking or who's actually participating in this behavior, and then coming up with stories and being able to say, these two people, I mean, being able to come up with stories such as, these two people are working at the same place and they're really chatty and they're essentially using our community as a back channel for work, but it's all on topic with the community, and so everyone's glomming onto that, and that's why I got this sudden rise. But that was a process of using both data to hunt things down, but then actually reading what's going on and understanding, and then coming up with the stories about that behavior.
I would also, just touching on top of that, just caution people when trying to get data or trying to ask people around their experiences, always be intimately aware of the fact that people will always massively misrepresent their actual, misrepresent their own opinions and their view of themselves. So a simple fix around that is, if you want to get a sense of norms in the communities, don't ask people what their view is of how they do things. Ask their view of how other people do things, because then it takes their ego out of the equation. Otherwise, you're going to get completely biased data.
Fantastic.
Yes, it's funny how many people are experts, and you know, when they self-select, right? Somebody self-selects themselves in a different thing, and then you run an actual test, and you're like, maybe not.
Also, keep in mind, asking the people you already have leaves out everyone you don't. And so there is some aspiration when you're usually doing social and community design. Who are the people who are missing, who we want to be here? Where are they? But that's a bigger scope than I think we're talking about today. But I've seen over and over the many years I've been doing online communities since the 70s, communities self-select themselves to death to do, whether it's metric-based research or ethnographic research, and conclude that their users are all in a smaller and smaller set of groups, and then hyper-optimize for those groups and never get new customers. This is famous for role-playing games. Role-playing games optimize to follow the power players who move further and further up the curve, and then new players come in and there's no one to talk to because they're all off in the mystical, magical land. This is known in that universe as the Hollow Earth problem, where the planet, if it's a virtual planet, no one's in the newbie worlds anymore, and no one has any time to train them. So you can over-optimize your product. Now, it's okay if you're willing to, end of life your product that way, but a lot of us aren't thinking that way.
Vendors, take note. Stop designing for everyone. Allow for different levels of experience to modify their interactions.
Wait, so there's not a one-size-fits-all? That's not a good idea?
Oh no, that's a great idea if you want to do what Randy says and optimize your product out of existence.
That's exactly what happens.
There's only one size fits all in sweatpants. Nothing else.
And although we all own them, no one wants anyone to see us in them.
There's a reason you don't wear them in public.
I think that's a good idea. Wiping Cheeto dust off your face. Anyway.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to bounce this into question 3. Remember, guys, if you do have any questions, feel free to shoot them over to the myCMGR Twitter handle. Number 3, so we were talking a little bit about research, and research actually shows that people don't like uncertainty in their relationships. How can we sort of build certainty into our communities?
Can you unpack that question a little bit? What research are we talking about, and what was the example?
So when I did this topic, I was talking with Jono. Jono and I created this topic together, and he gave me some examples of how behavior research impacts community workflows. So I was kind of trying to summarize our email conversation in this question. So Jono, if you could maybe jump in and kind of explain some of the background there, that would be super helpful.
So there's a really awesome study that was done by this guy called Dr. David Rock, who is basically a brain scientist, and he published a paper called the SCARF model, which is essentially 5 things that 5 human attributes that are fairly consistent that he backed up with some of his research. And one of the elements in there was around uncertainty. Is that people, when uncertainty exists in human and animal systems and groupings, it causes stress, it causes concerns, and it causes people to adjust their behavior in different ways. So, I think for me that was such a key learning, because we see it all the time in communities where somebody joins, or they don't really know what's going on, or you've got a company that's behind a community, and there's a sense that there's some things going on behind the scenes in the company, and that's going to have bad implications for the community and all this kind of stuff. So I think if we can identify ways to provide reassurance, and we can provide ways to provide that level of certainty, it helps people to feel more comfortable, and it helps people to reduce their level of anxiety and stress. And particularly, as I think a lot of people who join online communities are often people who don't feel necessarily very comfortable in offline settings. So therefore, we may have elements of more anxiety in online communities, and we obviously want to reduce that. So.
No one else is stepping up, so let me take a stab at it. I'm not familiar with the research, so I'm sorry if I'm a little off base here. There's always been the tradition amongst at least the community moderators who've been around a while and hung out with other community moderators and spoken with them, that there's the entire Welcome Wagon part, which is how do you welcome new users, new members into your online communities? How do you make them feel welcome? How do you make them know the rules? This can vary quite a bit, for example, in Stack Overflow and the Stack Exchange servers, it's very important that new users understand right away what's expected of them. Otherwise, they don't have a very good Welcome Wagon system over there. Because the community is very, very selective about quality. That there is no room for learning by making a mistake, or there's very little room for it, and you get an immediate feedback cycle that you're unfamiliar with, like a negative vote. It can be very off-putting. And so many of these Stack Exchange servers work very hard to kind of overcome this mechanism, which can be very off-putting and trigger that. On the other hand, purely text-based message boards or chat rooms and stuff, often people learn quickly. Either you were invited there by someone you trust who's inherits the obligation, the social obligation to make sure you understand what's going on, or the community itself or the company or whoever's hosting the community should be putting polices in. I don't know what to do about the long-term thing about, the company changes its policies underneath and now all of a sudden you can't do this or can't do that. I do know people dislike it when news sites turn off comments, so that's mostly because they didn't plan in advance knowing what was going to happen. So that's a lot, so I'll stop there.
I think I was going to say on top of that, I think one of the challenges that we face when it comes to uncertainty specifically is, I mean, arguably information is sunlight is the best disinfectant, and invariably, at least one of the things I've noticed in my career is not just in communities but elsewhere, particularly in the American political climate, is that when people don't have information, they basically invent their own information, and they jump to a series of conclusions that may be broadly right, but they're usually not. So I think information is definitely one thing that we can use as a tool to kind of reduce levels of uncertainty. The difficulty is that in communities, typically reputation doesn't decay, it doesn't degrade. And what happens, I think we see all the time, is somebody joins a community and they do great work, and then so people who are observing, maybe users of a particular piece of software or a service, know that person is deeply associated with that community. Then that person maybe goes away, they don't do anything for a while, or they get really frustrated with decisions that may happen in the community, and then they start being critical. And what happens is you then see people who you thought of being allies as being critical in a community, and that in turn generates a level of uncertainty, because it seems like it would be kind of like your parents arguing. Is there two people that you respect who are not getting on very well? So I think the real challenge to me is not so much the clarity around the things like the companies, that we can generally pertain to that with information and engagement. It's when you have internal factions who disagree or war with each other. It's reducing that, and that's a whole bigger topic around conflict and all kinds of other stuff as well. So I think it gives us, like a lot of behavioral economics, I think it gives us the right area to look at, the right questions to ask. But to your point, Randy, it's difficult to have any hard and concrete methods of solving this.
So I'd like to jump in, and first I'd like to say I think that John was right. This one question could be its own hour, because it does go into a lot of other things. So I'm going to touch on some things that what this brought up for me was sunlight is the best disinfectant, then proofing yourself against the disease is the best way to health. And so what I would say is, in working for reassurance and working for having a community to try to proof against this, the community manager holds the values and helps the community stay true to the values and goals of the community. And this helps you in that even though you've had a long-term ally who may have drifted away, staying true to the values doesn't make it personal. You're staying true to your values and goals of your community, and you can let that person know, hey, this is not working well. So consistent, backing of what your goals and values are, consistent facilitation, consistent enforcement. This doesn't proof. Nothing proofs against uncertainty. These are groups of people who are coming together, and that's kind of what's cool about it. But I think that kind of consistency can help you proof against, or at least ride out when these situations come up. Yeah. And I think that Randy's point is excellent too regarding the welcoming. I mean, that's part of this too. Is your values could be we want to encourage a certain kind of welcoming. I've been in communities that have unwelcoming behavior, but it's good for that particular community, but it's unwelcoming to others. So there's all manners of working on this. So yeah.
The number of go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Okay, so I just wanted to jump on top of that. One thing, like having that consistency, and it not only makes it better for your community to know that they feel safe, that they can leave a comment and somebody isn't going to call them names or badmouth them, because we will consistently edit that out, and we will consistently tell them, like, this is against our rules. You have to, you can't cuss at somebody else, or whatever the case is. It also helps our team, because we know what the rules are. We know what we're committed to. That we're committed to making people feel safe and comfortable, and and all those things. And having that consistency really helps on both sides of the coin, right? No matter what side you're on, that if you come in and you leave a comment and you're new to marketing, you're new to SEO, and you leave a comment that you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to sound really dumb, and people actually come in and are helpful, you're like, well, all right? You have that, okay, this is a place where I can talk and not feel stupid. And that's one of the things that for us is key. And having that consistency is always my, one of our top things that we talk about is, like, we have to stay consistent so that we make it easier for everyone. Again, stuff happens and sometimes it doesn't always work, but for the most part, that is, having our rules, having our values, sticking to them, and being consistent has really been key for us.
Sweet. Randy, did you still have something to add on top of that?
Just a quick story. I don't know if everyone knows, Flickr was originally a real-time photo sharing site with a chat program built in. Slack has actually got roots with Stuart Butterfield all the way back to the beginning of Flickr. Before that, it was a game, which he also made briefly. But anyway, the number one lesson they brought when I worked at Yahoo and we were looking at acquiring them, and I went and saw them, he told a story about how they greeted every single new user in their real-time chat platform when they came on. Every time, which meant they had 24-hour coverage on their real-time discussion platform, their IM platform. And this built a really strong, dedicated audience during the bootstrap phase. It's really important. This is important at bootstrap phase. This isn't necessarily something you want all the time, but again, in context, human contact mitigates uncertainty.
That is awesome. That's one of the things that I love about this, especially with you guys who've been doing community for a while, is the little stories and seeing what has roots in different places and sort of the evolution of all of that. So thanks for the story. Number 4, question number 4. That's like the worst transition ever. And now for something completely different. Research shows that bad behavior actually propagates when a dominant social group accepts it. So how does this impact community policies? And I think we started to talk about it a little bit, but Sherry, take this over.
Well, I was just going to say, Jono, if you want to jump in again and kind of explain some of the background on this one as well.
Yeah, this was some research done by Dan Ariely, which was essentially what he discovered was that was precisely that if you're in a social grouping and other people in the grouping subtly kind of break the rules or behave in a bad way, it makes it feel okay for you to do that. And he tested this within a bunch of different conditions, but one of the conditions that he tested in particular was not just, if you put 10 people in a room and people start misbehaving, then you often see, a commonality of bad behavior. It makes it okay for people to do it. But he also tested within the context of whether it's specific to people who share a similar set of traits, such as whether you follow the same football team or whether you are part of the same company or whatever it might be. And it was that research was also consistent with that. And I think we can see it in lots of different ways. Like when I first learned this research, It reminded me of when you're stuck in traffic and you've got like the clear lane that's designed for people to pull over onto, and you could actually bypass the traffic if you were to break the rules and go into that lane, and no one does it until the first couple of people do it, and then that lane becomes clogged with traffic because we think that it's okay to do that. And when I map this to the communities that I've worked with, when I've seen this, particularly in the open source world, I think it's definitely consistent. Like you see some websites and you see some communities where pretty intolerant or just outright trolling behavior is accepted and tolerated. And I think it varies in some ways. So one of the most complicated examples of this that I think we've seen is the Linux kernel. There's been a long-going debate about the conduct on the Linux kernel mailing list, where it's not trolling and it's not like 4chan or something like that. It's just extremely direct, at times quite confrontational behavior. And it's considered acceptable on that group because the leadership in the Linux world has considered it okay. And I think there's pros and cons for that approach, but I think that's a good example of this theory in action. So, and my theory here is that it's going to apply to every community that anyone here has worked with. Has probably seen an example of this at some point.
So there's a complicated piece of this that I want to tease out and invite the panel to comment on. And the question is the definition of bad. In the case of most of the communities we're interacting with, there is some entity, or usually a company, I'll just use the name company for now, but it can be any organization, that is establishing, hosting, paying for the servers, whatever, is the person, the people responsible for the community we're working with. They're in control of it. It's not true for all of them, but for the examples I'm going to talk about. And there's their hopes and goals and aspirations, and then there's the users themselves. And the example I'm going to use is from my book, Building Web Reputation Systems, is Yahoo Answers. We all know Yahoo Answers is known for its entertaining cute questions and answers. How is Babby form is the classic one that if you type it in, you'll see a bunch of research and everything about it. I must say I was at Yahoo when it was done, and this was the result of choices having to do with their reinforcement system. They reinforced arbitrary behavior that was decided by the users instead of selecting for quality. So instead of answering, it was originally set up with the goal of providing literally web search results for questions that the internet didn't already answer. This was the big thing that was going to be, I forget what it was. So social search was the big meme in the late in the mid 2000, early 2000 decade. Anyway, what happened is the users took over and decided it was more worthy to vote up things that were funny than it was to vote up things that were good, because they were encouraged to vote on everything, not on actually determining best answers. So people who spent the most time producing the correct answer would often get no votes, but the people who had these short, pithy, funny answers would get lots of votes. So where is the bad behavior in there, right? The community has defined this, and it was a debate inside the company, and basically Yahoo Answers is in effect just in maintenance, simply because they decided they couldn't overcome the fact that the users had taken over the service. So it's really tricky. If you don't model or build your systems to produce the output you want as the company, you will often find that you don't have control of the things that you've created.
I think we see a common example of this on Reddit, where the whole purpose of the up-down vote system is about relevance of content, and people actually use that as a means to determine whether they agree with something or disagree with something. But I also, if you look at Reddit as an interesting use case, the way some subreddits accept and tolerate bad behavior is ludicrous, and the way some of subreddits will absolutely not tolerate bad behavior. And it's complicated, I think, because where the Linux kernel example is difficult is that it's easy I think it's easy to see really bad behavior. It's easy to see trolling. It's easy to see abuse, sexism, racism, homophobia, all that kind of stuff. What's not easy is when you see people who are in very firm kind of technical or subject matter oriented discussions who are being very direct with each other. Some people interpret that as being bad, and some people interpret that as just being concise. And I think, to your point, Randy, that's where it gets like everything in what we do, it gets difficult.
I'd like to jump in on that really quickly and actually kind of use this as an example. So I can't remember. It was this week. NPR had their sociologist on, and he was talking about how people of a particular ideological view, when they argue with others, they're arguing from their ideological frame of reference, and they never convince the others. But when they shift the frame of reference, then they're actually able to make better arguments that make sense to the other person. They're able to come around to this. So I'm gonna back up and caution people. When we make that determination of good or bad, in sociology we talk about norms, and it's just here's the norm, the local norm. Here's what the local culture is. Now that local culture may be antithetical to this, but I think that if we think about it first in this is the behavior. Let's not put judgment around it. This is the behavior. As community managers, take a step back and say, is this behavior helping the community move forward? Is this the behavior helping greater diversity come in to help the Linux kernel? I'm not trying to solve that problem, but I'm just using it as an example. And and so now we might have a better position rather than saying that's really bad behavior. But as you said, you're seeing that as really concise behavior. This might not float well with somebody who's operating, in a different way, or trying to contribute to the Linux kernel in a different way. And I'm not saying again it's going to solve it, but I think that when we look at our communities, really often I've found myself in a position where, as you said, people without information start to make their own judgments, and they do that as moral judgments. And so somebody will come in, they'll behave what seems like it's poor behavior. The community might jump on them as bad behavior or as a troll. You start peeling back the layers, and they're just new. They don't understand the norms. They came from a different background. We talk to them a little bit more, and we can actually get them. Recovering somebody who's been jumped on by the community and having them be welcomed by the community is the biggest success we can have. And that's about identifying what that behavior is and not necessarily putting a label on it right away, especially if it's one that you're not experienced with. If the behavior is like, I don't know what's going on here. So I'm going to leave it. I have more to say on this particular topic, but I think Sherry should, or sorry, more.
Were you calling me out on something there, Scott?
I wasn't calling you out. I was trying to call it Jennifer.
Oh, okay.
I totally had a train of thought and I kind of lost it. The idea being, so for us, we have a very international community, right? And what happens, for example, anytime, so every Friday we have a video called Whiteboard Friday. And it's often Rand, who is who started Moz, but sometimes we have other people, and every now and then we have a woman who gives a Whiteboard Friday. And pretty much every time we have, a list of comments that'll come on and say, wow, like hottest marketer around, or, they start leaving these comments, and people are jumping on them like, oh, you sexist pig, and, all this stuff, which it is, right? And it's something that we actually don't keep. But let's say that you're from, a country where it's you're not like in the United States where everything is like you're a sexist and you have to like this and talk like this and do this, right? And you're coming from your country and you're like, wow, that woman's hot. I'm going to tell everyone how hot I think she is. She'll appreciate it. And it's hard for the person on the other end to not take it personal if you're like, you're a sexist pig, and it gets into this. So having that understanding up front, and also having that empathy to know, well, maybe they're not a sexist in thinking like that's just how they've always been, they grew up that way, right? So having that empathy to sort of take a look at like what's happening on the other side, and why did they even say that thing or do that thing or freak out in that way, is one thing to think about as a community manager of rather than simply assuming, oh, they must be a jerk, where are they actually coming from to get to that point?
So I will add to what Jennifer is saying and say, in addition to practicing empathy, work with your community to teach them to also practice empathy, because then they can be the extension of that. And again, it's proofing yourself against these things before you really have to step in.
I love that idea of keeping them teaching them to be empathetic as well, because that just makes everybody like better human beings. Who doesn't want that?
And this goes to the original question, which what I would say, here's where I will talk more on this, is so there's, I can't remember the specific name of this, there's a set of behaviors where in a situation where people are not clear as to what to do in that situation, they don't act until they see somebody else act. And so the story is, if you ever take emergency training, CPR training, or any kind of civilian emergency training, one of the first things they teach you is, if there's a situation you know what to do, you point to somebody in the crowd and you say, dial 911. It's a direct action, because otherwise everyone will stand around. And we see this behavior all the time. We see this, it's the same thing that the traffic situation that John talked about. I see this behavior in communities when somebody doesn't know how to behave because there are no examples for the behavior, or they're not clear examples for the behavior, then that's when some of the problems start to occur. And if we can get our community to be the examples, then they're always operating as those examples. I've done this with spam. It's kind of sort of broken windows theory, but not quite. Talking people through, hey, that looks like spam, and this is why I'd really like you to rework your message. I think what you're saying is great. I'd like you to be a part of the community, but we're trying to avoid things that look like this, because people who don't know come in and see you, and then they think it's okay to spam. And sometimes that works.
All right, I do have a question I wanted to bring in, just because we were talking about Reddit a bit. Julie, hey Julie, thanks for joining in. Do systems like Reddit end up becoming a popularity contest at times? And does it provide a shield for poor behavior because it's online? What do you guys think about that?
Yes and yes, but I'm sure she wanted to unpack a little more than that.
I'll unpack it. I'll
unpack a bit, guys. Let's unpack.
So the first thing I would say is, people pick on Reddit because there are some elements of Reddit that are really, truly atrocious. But there are some elements of Reddit that are really, truly wonderful. And I think if you dig down into it, it's what John said, and that is, it's how they're moderated. It's what behaviors are going on. Can you bring that question back up? Sorry, it's helping a lot.
There you go. There's the question.
Yeah. So there's a potential for it to be a popularity contest, but I think that in certain subreddits, it's possible to ward against the very system that is. You can do some social things that ward against this. Is it just a shield for poor behavior? It can be if it's left unattended. Because yeah, I think that the up-down voting system, like Randy was saying, is yes and yes. If it's unattended, if you leave, you get Lord of the Flies. And that's what our role is to help people sometimes overcome the very systems that we're working on.
I think what's interesting about Reddit, and I agree with everything Scott just said, is that, you know, I think, again, wishing to rag on economists, that we try to put, it's human nature, I think, to try to presume that we can fit people into the same shaped hole. And whereas in reality, we're all different shapes and sizes in the way that we approach the world. And what's interesting about Reddit is that it's a consistent system that, you know, for managing people contributing to something. But because it's broken into lots of different subreddits, you can quite clearly see that consistent system used in very radically different ways. So with some subreddits, you see pretty poor behavior, and you see, frankly, just a bunch of Muppets on the internet just entertaining themselves. Whereas then you see other subreddits, and some of the really popular ones, like, you know, Ask Reddit and Today I Learned and those kinds of things, that are just remarkable in terms of the way they bring insight and perspective to the surface. And one of the reasons why I read Reddit every night before I go to sleep is because I think it provides a means for people who you just would never see otherwise sharing really insightful things in the world. But what's interesting is that, and I didn't think about this until a friend of mine, Brian, mentioned this, is that Reddit by definition is a system that supports the notion of suppressing free speech. Because if you show up on Reddit and you post something and someone doesn't like it, it can get downvoted into oblivion. And by definition, that's free speech being suppressed. So I think it's important for us to remember, and I think to Scott's point, is that Reddit is not all things to all people. It's not perfect. And I don't think there is any community system that can be perfect, with the obvious exception of GitHub. But I think that Reddit does a pretty damn good job in the scheme of things. If you think about what they've accomplished, the challenge that they've got is, which is a whole separate discussion, is where they draw the line on what's okay in a subreddit and what's not okay. But I'd say the actual core system works pretty well.
One thing that I do have to say that I do enjoy that Reddit does when it comes to downvoting free speech is that, I mean, I was one of the people that actually went and saw Star Wars last night, but just in the Imager community, that there were people that downvoted any spoilers just to stop it from getting the front page. So sometimes it can be good, I guess.
I agree.
So it's worth noting that Reddit's challenges are like anyone else's who develops a system to allow community feedback to control content, right? And it's the nature of how you design it and what you learn. And I think the problem with most people when they design these systems is they design them, and they might be optimally for small communities or bootstrap, but they don't change them enough. If Reddit's got a problem with its technology, it's that it's not evolved to deal with the problems that they know they have. Twitter, let's get off of Reddit, let's get onto Twitter. Twitter has yet to evolve anywhere near as interesting a reporting mechanism for abuse that Facebook has. Have you used Facebook as an abuse mechanism? Man, it's nosed, it winds its way through. Are you trying to do a picture? Are you trying to sort this out? Can you sort this out yourself? Right? When you have millions of users treating all their votes the same and keeping things, excessively simple, ends up biting you in the back. As a company. Now, remember I said there are two parties. There's the community, the people interacting, and the company. I think many systems need to evolve more. I was part of a group of people that was agitating for a single change. Actually, I still want another one over at the Stack Overflow Exchange servers, and that was to change the word closed to on hold, because when new people would show up, they would misbehave because they didn't know how to behave. You have to be very, very narrowly controlled about what you ask and how you ask it for your question to even get answers. And so people would vote to close right away. This person doesn't know what they're doing, just close. And you get this thing that says -2, your reputation is -2, and your thing is closed. And it's like, well, that's nothing like sending a newbie away. How about this? Two things. One that you haven't done, which is you can't go below 0 if you're a newbie on your first question. But the other one is, can we get rid of that closed word? Because it's basically a kick in the head. When we're really saying is, this isn't ready for prime time yet, we're going to help you craft it into the thing it should be, and you into the kind of leader to be in this community. So they did change it. It's now on hold. And so it's not a huge change, but it took an amazing amount of politics and there was a lot of inertia to try to not change things. So evolution in community must go in step with evolution in technology.
I have to say, I think I disagree with you on one of your points, Randy, in this, is that I don't think, without wishing this to be the Reddit show, I think it's an interesting point to discuss, but I don't think every vote is equal in Reddit. I think part of what the genius of how Reddit have built their system is that a vote in the vote is a direct proportion, is proportional to the perspectives of the people who live in that subreddit. So, an upvote in a horrendous white supremacist subreddit is a support for white supremacy, and an upvote in a anti-racism subreddit is a vote for getting rid of racism. So I think even though mechanically the structure is the same, I think the context and the inference of the voting system is different. And also, I agree that Reddit hasn't changed a lot over the years, but I think part of the reason for that is because overall it works pretty good. And I think when you've got that many users and you've got that many people on there, you could make a tiny change, and the ripple effect could be really good, but it could also be pretty bad. I think the biggest criticism is the way they haven't taken a position when it comes to hateful material, which I think is more of a policy thing than a systems thing.
Sweet. All right, so we've done a great job of unpacking a lot of stuff, and we have about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to give each one of you guys a little bit of time here. I know that we sort of talked about resources, but when it comes to like actionable next steps, so if you're giving somebody like, here's what you should really look at doing next if you want to really dig into this more in their communities. Let's just go down the line, and everybody gives what they think in that regards. Take some time.
I'll babble while everyone gets a chance. So yeah, we posted a lot of first steps, places to start. I think getting self-education is a good spot, and then so start diving into honestly the Resnick and Kraut book. If you're a community manager and you haven't seen this, I highly recommend it as just a place to start getting an idea of how what it's good for is how to go from here's research and here's how we can interpret the research and here's how we can take action steps on it. So it's almost a sort of an example book of how to do exactly what we're talking about. And then I would say get educated on how to discern how people are doing research, because there's a lot of stuff going on in how a research is done, methodology and sample sizes and all these things, so that when you are looking at research, you are understanding what it's actually saying and if it is applicable to your particular context, or if it's just, hey, this is interesting. People get in wars about stacks of papers all the time, and it devolves into, is my research stack bigger than your research stack? Don't do it. It's a waste of time.
My advice is pretty simple. Don't go alone. It's always better to work on this with someone else. So if you don't have someone you're working with in your environment, join groups like this where you can ask questions and interact with other people and get people to frame it in a different view. It's so easy, especially if you come from the social media direction where everything looks like marketing. There's only one thing I'm going to say. It's not marketing. This is not marketing. This is about human interaction. It's sociology, ethnology, research, all this stuff. If you say the word marketing, if you start describing people as your communities as channels, use any of those marketing words, you're in trouble. If you're a bigger company and you need some help to get your head straight, hire someone like me or Scott or anyone else here who's a consultant. We help people get smart fast. We carry Dan Ariely in our head and can help you apply it directly to your problems.
All right, we got 2 left. Who's going to go first? Who wants
I'll
to close
go.
it out? All right.
I'll jump on top of what Randy just said. The discussion around going it your own, like that can be very difficult, right? I think one thing that people can do is see what other internal resources in the organization, no matter what your organization does, right? If you're Yahoo, right? Like there are other people in the organization that do research on various things. Maybe it's products, maybe it's software, maybe it's whatever else might be happening. I would look internally first, see if there's somebody there who can actually enlighten you. For me personally, I can read a book 10 times and it still doesn't make sense unless I act on it or somebody talks to me about it. So having that one-on-one interaction with another human being who knows what the heck they're talking about is extremely helpful. And another thing, again, to add to what Randy said is, I recently went with our internal researcher to a local, so here in Seattle, to a local researcher meetup, which, you know, I go to community manager meetups and SEO meetups and all these other things, and I was like, oh my gosh, they actually have meetups, like research meetups, and it was extremely, extremely interesting, and I learned a lot more there than I probably would have by reading a book on my own without having that additional information, right? So those are my two tips, and it's really just about getting out and talking to people who know what they're talking about.
And I think the thing I'd say, which I think is pretty closely related to or built on top of what Jennifer was just saying, suggesting, is to go into this, and not just this, but everything, and just frankly to just embrace failure and to embrace the fact that we're eternal students. I think all too often what we try to do is you know, the more we learn about our respective industries and our professions, we become more confident about that, and then when we become confident about that, we feel like we've figured the answers out to a significant degree. And one of the things that I found most exhilarating about this kind of sociological element to community is that it really proved to me just how much I didn't know, and just how much I've yet to learn. And in the work that I've done so far to embrace this and build this into my own work and my communities, I've been wrong more times than I've been right. And what it tells me is that experimentation, trial and error, and accepting that you're almost certainly going to screw up your first couple of things when you apply these kinds of techniques is really good. So don't be discouraged when you think, oh, I've just tapped into a central theme of how human beings operate, and then it doesn't really pan out. Is that you'll get there eventually. It's just all practice, and we're all figuring out this. I mean, you know, we're assembled as a presumed team of experts, and we don't really know what we're doing either. Like, we're figuring it all out just as much as anyone watching this.
Oh, I've taken notes.
All right, self-educate, don't go it alone, accept your failures, build on the shoulders of giants. Good stuff.
Plan for change.
Plan for change. And don't create a hollow earth, because that doesn't work. So Sherry, what do we have next week and the week after that?
So actually there is no CMGR Hangout for the next 2 weeks because it's silly to try to have one on Christmas Day or New Year's Day. So go have fun with your friends and your family and enjoy your time, and we'll be back on the 8th. And in the meantime, if you want to be involved in CMAD, make sure that you've connected with one of us so that we know. Thanks for joining us, everyone, today. This was really awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sherry. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right.
I really appreciate it.